Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Echale podcast. My name is Jose Quintero, and in the spirit of being November and we're celebrating Thanksgiving and being thankful, because I don't want to go into the history of Thanksgiving, so I'm just going to go ahead and say this is a thankful episode. I brought somebody very special to me, which is one of my best friends. I don't want to be like the top of the top because I love them all equally, all my best friends. But welcome, Emmanuel Garcia.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for joining. I would have asked Alex and Jimmy to be, but they have a little bit of camera talking anxiety.
Sure.
Does this give you anxiety?
I feel a little nervous. I'm not anxious, but I feel nervous.
All right. So we're going to just go ahead and just talk about being thankful, the importance of a male friendship. We're going to talk about how we met. We're going to go ahead and talk about the ups and downs, because a lot of my crazy stories in college involved this guy. A lot of my maturity and growing up involved this guy. So we're just going to dive into it. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, because at the end of the day, this is a podcast, echándole ganas a la vida, one episode at a time. So right? So this is all about, how do I say it? Growing up and how freaking...
Growing up in gratitude and being thankful.
Yeah, that part. But then we're also going to get into some like really deep conversations, just because we want to get to know you a little bit more as well. Like I even have notes that I forgot the other day. But do you remember when we met?
I do remember when we met. 2013.
Damn, friendship of 10 years. But do you remember literally where we were?
Like where we were at when we met?
Like what? Okay, what is it? There you go.
What comes to mind where we were at was the yard show.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Or was it the social?
My first thought was the social. So for people who are listening and probably went to college and joined a Greek fraternity or sorority, you have a thing called social. So social gatherings is where a fraternity and a sorority, or sometimes two fraternities, just hang out and mingle, network. A lot of you guys know it as networking. Over there it was called socializing. But yeah, when we were interested in bringing on new members to the fraternity, we obviously had social gatherings with other sororities in order not just to kind of see like, yo, this is a socializing you could do at this fraternity.
Yeah.
Kinda.
Well, it was also just a place to mingle, right? And getting to know like people at college, and of course with the fraternity and the sorority and things like that.
So in this circle, because we all got in a circle and obviously like we kumbaya'd and whatnot, but we had to go ahead and say like, hey, tell me something interesting, or a truth and one lie, or something like that. Or no, what's something that you like?
I think it was just fun facts about yourself.
There you go. Fun facts about ourselves. So I remember when we were going through the whole circle and whatnot, it got to you, and what did you say? Do you remember?
I remember saying a couple of things, but one of the things that I said that kind of startled everybody in the room was, I like taking shits.
Yeah, dude. So imagine like you're trying to join a fraternity, and then this guy out of nowhere, which, by the way, you see him now, and we're going to go into, he is now a therapist. So just FYI, y'all, la cosa se va a poner seria. But you obviously dressed different. You acted different. You were straight out of high school. I was in my fourth year of college, and here I am, my first year in the fraternity, even though it was my last year at college.
Yeah.
I want like serious people joining my fraternity and whatnot. And here comes this 18-year-old saying, I like to take shits. We were like, what the hell? Like, I was.
I'm actually curious to know what it was that you thought about, like, my comment. Like, what did you and Alex, Jimmy, or the other bros at that time, like, what did you guys think about, like, me saying that?
I can't speak for everybody else. I just know for me.
Well, I'm sure, too, though. Like, I mean, you guys talked about interests, right? And you guys got together as a group or whatever, and you guys kind of talked like, oh, like, this interest is cool, this interest is not.
So again, in fraternities, sororities, not all of them. Again, I'm speaking on our experiences as a fraternity at Cal State San Bernardino, Sigma Lambda Beta. After we hung out with the interests after a while. Yeah, the typical like, hey, I'm going to put the image of them on a screen. We did, and their resume and whatnot, and filter like, do we like this guy? Do we not? Like, what do we all feel? I'm going to have to think about that one. But going back to your original question of like, yo, what did I think at the moment when you said like, yo, I like taking shits?
Yeah.
Obviously, you didn't look like the type of person that I would hang out with in high school. More so the type of people that I would try to avoid.
Yeah.
You know, I'd be like, oh, this guy just thinks he's too cool for everybody. He did that just to be funny. I fucking hate those guys. Like, I'm sure he was like a fucking creído fuck boy.
And honestly, that just came from me just being authentic, being myself at that time, and just letting people know who I was.
And it's funny because as we got to know you, it's like, oh shit, this guy really likes taking shits. Like,
I actually took a shit right before starting this podcast.
Exactly. So that was freaking interesting. But sitting in, I guess, like our little room at the university, kind of filtering things out, I do remember I said, I don't know if he would take this process or this fraternity seriously. Just because, again, I was going based off of your appearance, like judging a book by its cover, not necessarily like, yo, this guy is resilient, the story behind every person. And it was just what I saw, and I guess I was projecting the people that I didn't like, and I didn't hang out in college because they were either bullies to me, or at the same time they just thought they were just too cool for everybody. And I was all like, no, I fucking left high school in the past. So it was a sort of, now that I think about it, like a little reminder of like the thing that I left in the past that I wanted to stay in the past.
Yeah.
So,
you know, as you say that, it was pretty common for me to hear that a lot. Like people misinterpreting or judging, or just like you're saying, judging a book by its cover. Like people often thought less of me, or thought that I wasn't very intentional or serious about school, XYZ, right? So like, now that you say that, I'm not surprised, but I do appreciate like you being aware about the projection part, because maybe it was just you projecting, like you're saying.
I was. And look at these terminologies that I have learned thanks to the therapists in the friend group, because I want to say, well, you're the only therapist, but there's a couple people who went through the counseling program.
Yeah.
So,
and just for context, if I can share just what kind of therapist I am. I am an adolescent therapist. I work primarily with kids 12 through 17 and their families, so that puts me in a family therapist role. And it's a mental health therapist, because there is different types of therapies out there and different type of therapists. So just for context, so people can have more of an understanding where I'm coming from.
Thank you for that. And hopefully we'll get into like your journey in therapy, because that in itself is inspiring and motivational. But I remember going back to the fraternity and how we first met, and this is all about being thankful for friends, thankful for the universe, because I do feel at the end of the day, like God, the universe, whatever you think, I think puts people that you may not be in agreement with, but it's the people that you need at the time and at the moment. Again, I was coming from like a fraternity where I felt like I didn't really have a lot of male friends growing up, so the fraternity was very special to me, because it was the first time that I was like, all right, these are male friends that I can trust, and I feel like I am completely myself around, right? There was no trying to be anybody else. It was just funny, stupid me, who was still going through the healing. Then your Line Brothers came along, and for those listening, when you go through a process or a fraternity process, you typically go and do it with a bunch of people, and those people that you do the process with are your Line Brothers. And then the people who are taking you through the process or educating you through the process, that would be considered your dean. So it's like your teacher, and then you have an A dean, which is the assistant teacher, which is what I was to him and 3 other gentlemen. And I remember that whole process. The whole process in itself is changing. And I don't want to go into that, but do you feel like there was a change in you during the process?
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, it was like its own unique experience, you know, and there was a lot of change through that. I don't know if you want me to go into that change, or if you even want to dive into like the whole fraternity, Greek life, or if you
I don't want to divulge, because we can't divulge like what happens during the process. But I guess more than anything, was there a before and after? in your life? Like, do you feel like you matured a little? Do you feel like, yo, you know what?
I feel like I developed, sorry to cut you off there, but I did develop through the organization a lot of like leadership skills, a lot of skills just in terms of like my professionalism. And in terms of like my personality, I feel like there was also a downfall. I felt like a lot of the ego and pride that comes with like representing a certain organization kind of exacerbated my own pride and ego, and it didn't come out so pretty, you know.
That's true.
When we would be drinking, or when we would have like this pride with our organization being better than the other, or like, just for more context, you know, just simply one-on-one conversation with people in a different organization, whether it was a fraternity or sorority. I always, in my back of my mind, thought that I was better, right? Because of what I came to learn about pride and ego and representing our organization. So I feel like in that sense, it didn't really help me socially or emotionally. Like, it didn't really help me with that. But leadership skills, 100%, like that definitely developed my character, my professionalism. Yeah.
And for context as well, because the purpose of today is sharing stories to be thankful. And again, I am thankful for my friends and family in the fraternity, but through the thankfulness, we've also had to experience learning and growing within our own selves. And I say that because like, there is no perfect person and everybody comes with trauma and whatnot. So when I joined this fraternity, I definitely wanted a brotherhood. I was seeking that so bad. And I've always, and we were just having this conversation, I've always wanted somebody that to be like, yo, that's my best friend, like, or that's a really good friend that I can trust, because I didn't have that growing up. I felt like there was a lot of trauma in my childhood that I'll probably go on in another episode and talk about what I was dealing with as a kid, and then kind of growing up into adulthood, and what led me to join a fraternity, which was the best thing that I could do for my mental health and sanity, even though it was the most beautiful experience I would not do again. But with that being said, there comes a point in the fraternity or in your process that you get assigned, you get to choose. I'm just kind of leave it up in the air because it's different for everybody, that you get in our Latino organization a padrino. A padrino, which is somebody like a big brother for those people who have seen stereotypical fraternity and sorority.
Or a mentor.
Yeah, or a mentor, right? So I was placed with you, and place chosen kind of like, oh, okay, cool. I think it was funny at the time because I was more so thinking like, oh, I want to be a padrino to Alexis, your line brother. Like, you never really crossed my mind. And when I was speaking to Alexis, because I was like asking like, hey, have they expressed interest to somebody else? I remember he said he's thinking like of you, and I was totally shocked. So I want to know like why.
Sorry, I kind of blanked out there. Do you mind?
This happens a lot.
No, it's because like you were talking about my line brothers, and then it just kind of took me back to like those times. So I was just reminiscing in my mind. So
Imagine
I totally
being
like
a
blacked out.
And then like I'm pouring my heart out over here, and you as a therapist, can you repeat that? I just blanked out. You triggered me.
No.
So
I don't even want to get into that, but go ahead.
No, but it was sort of when we were. When you guys were choosing padrinos, or they were being chosen for you, I asked Alexis, hey, who is Emmanuel thinking of? And he said, oh, he's thinking of you. And I was like, oh, what was your thought process behind that?
I felt like at that time, from what I remember, you guys had given us an assignment. Like, think of like 5 people that you would see as a mentor, padrino, or whatever. And you were on that list, but you were on everybody's list. And
I'm just saying.
But also, I'm gonna like stroke your ego down a little bit right now.
Don't trip.
You were like on my number 4. Like my number 1, I remember it was a bro. Shout out to that bro from Cal Poly. It was Tim.
Oh, Tim.
I remember I wanted Tim, and then I wanted Alex.
Yes, everybody also wanted Alex. So
and these are just fraternity brothers. So it's like,
just for context.
Yeah, for context.
We may or may not put a picture, probably not without their authorization. But I feel like everybody wanted Alex at some point, because he is a great brother.
When you think about the fraternity and the faces that come with that fraternity, it was you, it was Alex, and it was Jimmy. And
I think it was also the circumstances at the time, because the older brothers were graduated and were less present, and they were trying to figure out their lives as well.
Yeah, and it was just nice to see all three of you guys, or just, the faces that were kind of like the face of the fraternity at that time when I was interested, like just be so actively engaged on campus. Like people knew of you. You were working on campus, like you had so many like resources, like all that, right? And it was just kind of inspiring, and also like, well, I want to be that too. I want to be able to like know people. I want to be able to work on campus. I want to be able to just have that type of connection with other people.
Yeah. And now that we have like the foundation kind of set, this is where I think the friendship really takes a twist, because again, with other episodes that I'll probably take and talk about, me as a person, I felt like I was really good to everybody, and sometimes pretty harsh, because yes, the fraternity does give you a sense of pride and confidence and a fuck you mentality to everything and everybody, because after going through a process like the ones that we went through, it does stroke your ego, and it's like, if I could do this, I could do anything.
Yep.
And for a lot of us, we still think that way. We're just a lot more mature as to how we approach these things. But with that being said, I mentioned earlier, I didn't have a lot of male friends growing up. Even though I joined this fraternity and I had 2 line brothers that I did the process with, I wasn't really that close with them, because 1, they were younger. 2, I felt like I still had some healing to do. I was close with Jaime, Alex, and everybody else, but it wasn't like they also had lives aside from mine. Like I wanted like my ride or die, like let's go, as we would say, cause damage, causando desmadre. That was our chapter, Kappa Delta. So we would say causando desmadre. So then when you came along and you said like, oh, I want you to be my padrino, I took it as and we were talking about this earlier, like, I wanted to be cared for as a child. That's something that I needed to heal. So whenever I had a child, quote unquote, I would want to protect and be kind of overbearing. Yeah. And you came along, and it was pretty much like that. We went from activity to activity to activity. So I could honestly say when we had enough of each other, because it came a point where you're hanging out with somebody that you're like, I need some time. I was a jealous friend. Yeah. I was a jealous friend where it's like, how come I didn't get invited? What the fuck?
Which would throw me off. It was a little like weird, sometimes. But like, just so because it sounds like for you joined the fraternity because you wanted brotherhood, right? Yes. Like you wanted like the connection and with male.
And I was older. I was 21, 22 at the time. You were 17, 18?
I was 18. Yeah. So when I joined, my intention behind joining was like the networking, right? And like growing. Like
partying.
Well, let me get there. It was also partying. Like I would see that like not only would you guys work hard, but you would also party hard, and I wanted that, right? Like I wanted to find that balance of being able to party and still wake up the next day and get my shit done. Yeah. And I really appreciated that about what I saw. When it came to the brotherhood aspect of it, I wasn't necessarily looking for that brotherhood or that bond. I mean, growing up, I did have friends, and in high school, I had like plenty of close friends, and I always had like my boys, right? Mm-hmm. And I think in college, that brotherhood, when I was joining the fraternity, like it was also just to know more people and just have like more friends in college, because a lot of my friends did not go to college. I was the only one that left. Mm-hmm. And so like, although it was part of, just to meet more people, it wasn't really like my main focus why I wanted to join the fraternity at that age when I was 18.
Yes. No, I completely, I could see that, because you would go party, which you had all the right to, but then I was also the type of person that like, I would wear my emotions, and I still wear my emotions on my sleeves, but I just control them a lot more. Mm-hmm. But when I was mad, I expressed it. Right. And probably not in the nicest way. And it was like the cold shoulder, stop talking. Again, it took a lot of time and healing, because we would hang out. We would literally drive 1 a.m. and do some stupid stuff, and then come back and go to work the next day and do it all over, literally Monday through Sunday. And it was sort of because nobody else wanted to. So let me also clarify that. Not because like Emmanuel was the only one that wanted to do it, but we would invite other people. But then it just got to a point where nobody really wanted to go. And nobody was like, yo, are you down to drive to San Diego? But we're going to come back right after. Mm-hmm. They're like, nah, we're going to go over here. Hey, are you down to drive to Sacramento? And then we're going to come down. And it's like, yo, we're in college. We should.
Right, it's like adventure, explore,
Yeah.
experience, right? And just like get out there and like just do as much as you can.
Yeah, and nobody wanted to do it, so he was the only one down. So obviously, it was a natural gravitation towards like, all right, let's do it. And then,
And at that time, I was coming again from a place of just wanting to like, yes, party, but also explore and expand and just kind of experience everything and anything that I could in college. Going back to like after I joined the fraternity, because before I was very self-centered, you know, I was very close-minded. I was also very arrogant. And once I joined and I had that connection and you became my padrino, like there was more vulnerability that started to show up, right? Yeah, arise. So there was more vulnerability, and I never really had that type of connection with another
male figure
or just someone that was older than me to like really show me that.
Yeah. I mean, you would mention your brother a lot, like Alex, and I would always be like, oh, dang, this is a good person, because you would say like you had a good conversation with your brother. So I don't want to like diminish that, because I think that was probably one of your first.
Well, this is outside of family, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
There you go. So outside of family. Because I didn't even have that with my family. Being the oldest, it was like, I mean, I saw my brothers connecting really well with other young men, and I was like, how come I can't do this in high school? Like, they have friends since like third, fourth grade, and like, what is wrong with me? And again, I'll leave that to another episode. But it so many nights of partying, drinking, being drunk and whatnot. Obviously, when people drink, they get emotional. They start to cry. Their demons start to come out, and you start to like realize, like, dang, dude, there's a lot of hurt in this person, right?
Right. And that was me a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And I mean, that to segue out, right? Like now, fast forward, like I'm in my own recovery process. I'm sober, and it's like, at that time, it would come out when I was under the influence because it's alcohol, you know? Yeah. And everything that would come out, I never talked about. You know, I never had a vulnerable conversation. I never allowed myself to cry. I never felt safe enough to cry with anyone.
And me being the dramatic person growing up with novelas, I was like, wow, I get to have a friend to talk about like emotions and whatnot. And I've always been like, yeah, I want to have open conversation.
Super dramatic.
Hell yeah. So I remember when he would start like talking and crying, and I was just like, oh, this is somebody that I can really talk to and be like, no, you got this, whatnot. And obviously, to say those moments didn't come like easy,
no,
because they came with a lot of stupidity behind it.
Yeah.
And one that I always remember, and it's mine, right? That like driving drunk is one of the ones that I did a lot, right? Because I always explain here in the podcast that like my probably most dangerous moment where I realized I had an alcohol problem was when I was driving from, we drove to San Diego to a party, to a Chargers versus Bronco games, and we drove back to LA. We could have easily gone home,
right?
But we were like, we want to keep on partying.
Yeah.
Granted, we were partying since like 8 a.m.
That's what alcohol does, you know, once you start, it's like you got to keep going, at least for me. And I mean, maybe for us, we kind of like fed off of each other's energy.
Yes, we did. If one of us was down, we're like, you're not down, let's freaking go. Yeah. And then vice versa. And that's how the whole like, you're not down, that was our cue to like, fuck, let's fuck shit up. Yeah. Like the whole, just saying, you're not fucking down. I'm fucking down. Yeah. Anywho, so we went to the UCLA party with the brothers. Two of our other friends, fraternity brothers, stayed in the car to sleep, Rafa and Shafiq. Yeah. And we went and partied. We left 2 a.m. to the point where I was driving drunk and got on the other side of the freeway. Like literally, we were going westbound and traffic was coming eastbound. If it weren't for Shafiq, who opened his eyes, literally saw a car coming because it was honking, he swerved, and because I was knocked out behind the wheel, and he's like, yo, what the fuck? Got out. He was obviously way more sober than I was because he had already been asleep for like 3 hours. Yeah. And yeah, he drove. That's when I realized I had like an alcoholic problem that I needed to work with. There were moments with you. Do you remember probably one of like the bigger moments?
Well, there was a lot of moments. So
I'm talking about New Year's.
Okay. Yeah. New Year's.
Do you want to explain that one? What happened, or what do you remember?
I mean, a lot of these moments, it would lead to blackouts, and it would lead to like not even knowing what it was that you just weren't conscious, when it came to the alcohol. But that specific experience or that moment was like near death. And I don't even, I'm going to just go into it. So like, it was New Year's Eve, got drunk. I really don't remember the steps that led up to this point, but I just remember being in a garage, partying with our friends, welcoming in the new year. And then the next thing that I remember was me walking by the train tracks and me having like this.
From San Bernardino to Riverside, which is a 20-mile difference.
Yeah. And I just, in my mind at that time, the intentionality that I had was like, I'm going to jump in front of the train. And it's like, where did that come from? And it's like, that was beyond more than just me being blacked out and drunk, but there was a lot more happening. And so like, that was very scary. And I really appreciate you for being there and being with me and not allowing me to like do that.
I remember it. And I guess because I'll say the other side of it, because I was still drunk, but I was a lot more sober than you were, because I would drink to get drunk. You would drink to black out. And at some point I would also drink to black out, but this was New Year's, and for some reason I was drinking, but I wasn't like blacking out that day.
And I kind of remember like it was almost sunrise. It was like close to sunrise.
It was like 4 a.m. when we were leaving the house,
and I was walking, like we were already in your car, and then I jumped out of the car. I want to say when we stopped by the train tracks.
We were...
And then you started following me in your car.
So this is what happened. We were driving back from from Rialto, and we were driving somewhere because we ended up in Riverside. We were going somewhere, clearly not back home, which we should have, because your house was like 5 minutes away from where the party was.
Yeah.
And literally off of an exit, you just decided to get off the freeway.
Yeah.
And because we were like, oh, let me just take a piss and whatnot. And you took a piss and then you ran off. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, obviously, I was tired. Fucking my drunkenness se me quitó real quick. Yeah. And then I was chasing you because you were like running up the hills, and I had to take an exit. I couldn't run up with the car with you. Yeah. Right. So I was trying to find you. And I think I was calling you and you're like, I'm by here and over here, yada, 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 this and this. I go and find you, and you're by some train tracks.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what are you doing? And we have a conversation. It's like, I'm just going to wait for the train. And I was like, what? Mm-hmm. And then literally it was screaming like, no, get back in the car. And then it's like, nah, I'm going to wait for the train. Then you hear the train from a distance, and it's coming closer. It's still afar. And literally, like, you step in front of the train tracks, and I like grab you and I put you in the car, and I lock the doors.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, let me, like, you were literally like, let me in. Like, I want to go. And I literally put my car in the middle of the train tracks. Again, I don't know what I was thinking. The dramatic person in me was like, all right, if you're going to want to be in front of the train tracks, then I'll be in front of the train tracks as well. But then I want you to be conscious that you're also going to be responsible to whatever happens to my car and myself.
Yeah.
And your face was just like, and literally the train was coming. I was like, please say something, please say something.
Yeah.
And you said something, and we backed out. We kept going, and we did have a couple stops where you did run off, and it was already like 6 a.m.
Yeah.
And I would literally leave my car parked in the middle of the street where it was red light, and then just grab you and throw you in the back. So there was a lot of those moments, but I think that one was
it was one of those bigger moments, and it was like one of the beginning moments. And to be quite honest with you, like, I never really, like, I did talk about that, and I did talk about like many of these experiences in therapy already. However, that specific moment, like, just kind of reflecting back and thinking of what I had to put you through, like, I mean, I'm sorry. Honestly, like, I'm sorry for having to like put you through that. I mean, I have to be honest, I don't fully remember like the full beginning and middle and the end of why that led up to that point. What I can say is that that's why I'm sober. You know, like, this is why I no longer drink. This is why I am fully in my own recovery journey, and I'm healing through a lot of these experiences. That's just, you know, from you and I that you were able to witness. But there's been a lot of moments like this where I've been able, like, to go through or went through with other people or just alone sometimes. So
and I felt guilty when you were alone and going through those times, because literally we would hang out all the time, and when we wouldn't hang out and things happened, I was just like, oh fuck, I could have probably prevented this.
Yeah.
Or I could have probably like been there, you know. And I mean, but to say
there's so much that goes into that though, right? Like, I mean, we can spend a different episode or a different podcast just educating like the effects of alcohol and educating the mental health aspect of things. I mean, there's just so much that goes into that, just for people to understand that didn't just happen because it just happened. Like, there's so much more that goes into that.
What was your breaking point where you said, I need to stop drinking alcohol? Because to me, it was what helped me, which was funny enough. You went in 2016 or 2015, I remember February came around, and February was Cuaresma, so Lent. Yeah. And you said, I'm going to give up alcohol. And I was already graduated, because I graduated 2014. You were still in school. And I was like, well, fuck, none of my friends are going to drink. I'm going to give up drinking for Lent too. Mm-hmm. And the 40 days went by, and I honestly started to feel different. And I was like, oh, I'm going to stop drinking. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I'm going to commit myself to stop drinking for a whole year and see what that does. With leaving alcohol, that also caused some distance within our friends, like most of my friends, because everybody was still partying, everybody was still in undergrad, and it was like, well, I can't really connect with these people anymore because all they want to do is drink, and I'm trying to be sober for a year. That way I can control the urges of alcohol and not wanting to drink anymore.
Yeah, you know, I never wanted to drink, to be honest.
That's interesting.
I started drinking at an early age 14, you know, freshman year of high school. And the main reason why I started drinking was because everybody else was doing it. And, like, I grew up in my neighborhood. There was a bunch of us. There would be, like, a good 10, 12 people always hanging out, like, on the weekends. And, you know, of course, there was a lot of house parties. There was a lot of, like, you know, people younger than me and people older than me drinking, smoking, and then doing other stuff at that time too. And before entering high school, I was always what they would call straight edge. They would call me like, oh, like, no, he doesn't drink, he doesn't smoke, he doesn't do the other things that they would do. And I was like, I almost felt left out, and I felt like I needed to be a part of the group, you know. And this is something that I didn't really like talk about until later on in life, but that's the reason why I started drinking, because of the pressure, the social pressure, just growing up, like, it being around me. And so, like, once I started, like, I just kept going, you know. But I've also seen, like, before I started drinking, just what the drinking would do, like, with family, you know, with my dad, with, you know, like, tios at the parties, things like that, like, and my mom would always tell me, like, no vayas a tomar, no estés tomando, like, just don't do it. And I'd be like, like, at first I was like, okay, I'm not going to. And then I started doing it, and then she would tell me that, and then I would start to lie to her that I'm like, no, I don't.
But I mean, it got to a point where I was lying to her, and she hit me.
Yeah, and I started living, like, this double life. You know, there was, like, the side of, like, my family and even friends, they would see me as, like, the innocent, the innocent one. The guy who went to
college, the guy who made it, the guy from the Rialto who is doing better for himself.
Yeah, and then deep down, I was living another life where it's like, no, I was actually doing a lot of fuck shit. You know, I was, like, doing a lot of, like, not a lot of drugs, but I was drinking. I was causing a lot of rage, chaos, XYZ. But from the very beginning, just going back to the core of it all, like, I never really wanted to drink. And then as time went on, even through college, even after college, I started my master's program. Like, a lot of these experiences that happened to me of, like, near-death experiences, like the one we just talked about, or just I would wake up with full of regret, guilt, or just because I did something.
What made you go into counseling? Because so many people would be like, hey, you're so distant from your emotions, you didn't really want to talk about it. So when did you decide, like, yo, I want to get into therapy, or I want to get into counseling?
That's a very good question. I want to say it was when I started advising middle school kids, and it was through a job that you hooked me up with. And I think at that time you were working with Europe,
I was.
and then you were working in San Bernardino with a middle school, and then I started kind of expressing to you like, I'm kind of curious in
Yeah.
at that time sociology and doing social work and wanting to see if I can work with kids and families and like,
Yeah.
and it also came just from my own like personal
Mm-hmm.
my willingness, but also like my personal like like I want to be able to help people. Like I wish I was able to get the help.
Yeah.
Like I want to be that person. There was this quote a long time ago that I used to love all the time when I was going through grad school, but it's be the person, be who you needed when you were younger.
Yeah.
Sorry. Be who you needed when you were younger. And I felt like when I was younger, I really needed like someone to provide that safe space for me.
Yeah.
And so like as I started to think more and more of it, and I started getting into the academic advising with middle school kids, I started seeing the difference that I was making in these kids' life. And I was like, I think counseling may be something that I can do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what opened up the door to like me being a therapist, because there's a whole lot of things.
Which is
that go
funny
into
because like when you, I think they were looking for a job, or you said you wanted to see if you could work at a middle school, because it was like trying to get paid more, or trying to also, I don't know. To me, it was like, oh hell yeah, I'm gonna have my best friend like working with me. Well, fuck it.
Yeah.
But obviously there was way much more that you wanted to explore, and you found that in at the middle school. So I'm glad you did. Then you finished your counseling program,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there was another turning point where you decided to go completely sober.
Going back to my sobriety, like I was telling you, like originally I didn't want to drink, or I didn't want to do any of these things. And there was always a voice inside that I would either feel or not necessarily hear, but there was also always something in me that said like, you just need to stop doing all of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I never really like acknowledged it. I never really like gave it the time that it needed. So there was always that voice in me of like, I'm gonna be sober, I'm not going to be doing any drugs or any alcohol. And as more time progressed and I started getting older, it started not just impacting like my social friends, but also like my career, my relationship, like, and even with family. Like there's been some times that maybe I have shared with you, but just like a lot of the things that, for example, I remember this one time where I think my family called you asking if I was with you.
Yeah.
And
I lied.
And the police have showed up to my house, right? Yeah. And so that morning I woke up. Yeah. I woke up on the sidewalk, like completely almost like butt naked on the sidewalk. Like, how did I get there?
Yeah, you don't remember.
And I don't remember fully like how that happened. Oh, yeah. But that day when I got home, both of my grandmas from my mom and my dad's side were at my house with my mom waiting for me to come home. And as soon as I got home, like, my grandmas just started crying. And I'm feeling emotional now, like just kind of remembering like that specific moment. But it was affecting my family. It was like this alcohol, I didn't have control over it. I would start drinking and I wouldn't want to stop. And so like the more and more problems that would come up, it always involved alcohol. Yeah. So it just came to a point where it's like, it doesn't serve me. It's impacting my career. It's impacting like my relationships with my family, like friends. And more importantly, like it's impacting my relationship with my girlfriend. And so, I don't want to continue to live that. It's not worth it. Yeah. And also it's like, it's life or death.
Yeah, no, I remember that vividly. I think it was your brother who reached out via Facebook, and I was just like, what is going on? And like, I was able to call your girlfriend, and it was like, let's find him. I remember she's like, I think she's with this person. Give me that person's number. And I called, and I was screaming at her friend. It was her friend. I didn't even know her. Then I'm like, where is he? Well, he just walked. Where the fuck is he? Like, his family's looking for him, the police, yada, 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 this and that. And yeah, I don't know. But It was.
I mean, and that,
I mean, I do
that
know.
goes back to like just gratitude and just me being grateful for you as a friend, you
Yeah.
know, and you know, not just a best friend, but your family, bro.
Yeah.
You know, it's like there's not that many people that you're gonna meet in this lifetime where they're gonna be able to show up for you like that, you know. And you really showed up for me in times where I needed people to show up for me, and I really appreciate you for that. And I feel like I can say the same.
Yeah, no, likewise. You moved after you completed your counseling program. Obviously, there was a transition to you going into working with adolescents, right? Who had problems with addiction. How did you feel, or how do you feel working with these kids, knowing that you yourself had issues in the past? Does it give you more grounding, like some connection?
Well, it goes back to like service and, you know, in the recovery world, like just being able to be of service to other people. And so like it's just nice. Not only is it nice, but it's very empowering and very rewarding for me to be able to hold space for not just families, but kids, knowing that like for me, in my experience, when I started using was at age 14, and a lot of these kids, I feel like they start either at that age or earlier. I mean, you'd be very surprised just some of the stories that I've heard or just some of the families that I've worked with. But just going back to like that question, it's just, it feels very empowering. It feels like I'm being able to guide and support.
Yeah.
And
do you ever share? I mean, I don't know, as a therapist, can you share like, hey,
you could share. There is self-disclosure. It really is depending on the case. It really goes back to your judgment as a therapist to be able to know when to share, when not to share. So it just really depends.
I think you going through therapy, you being there was a turning point, obviously, when I moved to LA to pursue my dream. And I obviously have to thank the fraternity. I have to thank you more than anything, because when there was no people. Okay, so just backstory. When I wanted to get into the industry, obviously one of the biggest things that I had to do, and when I was working with Univision as an unpaid volunteer, I wasn't even an intern, I would volunteer my time. But with that being said, they would throw events, and in those events, there's not a lot of people that from Univision corporate, because it's also volunteer time for them. They have this event and the people who are organizing it, but then to logistically run everything, it takes a lot of hands. So then they would look towards me to help. And what would I do? I would bring people from the fraternity, from other sororities, depending on where they were, and I would bring them to help the people at Univision, because it would make me look good. And when people couldn't come, or I didn't have any people, you were always there. You were always willing to go and, help me in my dream, more than anything. But there was
you worked really hard for it. I remember you put in a lot of work for that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it definitely took time, but I'm glad I was able to say what I've always said, because when people asked me in college and even in high school, and even other brothers in other chapters, because when they would call me and they'd be like, oh, what do you want to do? And you go like, oh, I want to work at Univision, or like, oh, that's my dream job, or radio entertainment. And some people would laugh. Some people would be like, oh, that's cool. But then, and funny enough, people would make fun of me when I started my YouTube channel, my first YouTube channel, which was called Echale. Now it's become a podcast.
Yeah.
But they would be like, they would make fun of it. And it kind of hurt at the same time. But you, Alex, and Jaime were always very supportive in it. And thank you for that. But the turning point was I moved to LA, and obviously there was a lot of like solitude and getting to know each other. You going through your counseling program, I think not only helped our relationship as friends, but it helped the relationship amongst a lot of the brothers in the fraternity, because little by little you started expressing how you felt about certain things.
Shout out to my counseling program, because that was honestly the very beginning of my healing and my own process of being able to talk about all of these challenges that I had before entering that program.
Yeah.
Like, that program, we would have classes where we would have like group therapy sessions type almost, or where you would get very vulnerable, and the professors, or even we would do like small exercises to be able to just,
that seems intense.
Yeah, I mean, you're wanting to become a therapist, and so one of the main things that is very helpful as becoming a therapist is knowing what it's like to be on the other side, right? Which means go to your own therapy.
How was that, being reluctant and now being vulnerable in front of people?
You know, at first, I again, it goes back to like me not feeling comfortable, safe, and someone like providing that space. Like I didn't really know that was out there. You know, I didn't have the education.
Yeah.
And so like therapy to me I was never like resistant towards it. I just didn't know it existed. I didn't know that there was like someone that you can talk to about your mental health or about like your emotions, you know, like I never really understood that.
Yeah.
Until later in life, towards the end of my college experience, and then applying to my master's program. And that's how I started being more curious, because I wanted someone like that. And then also I wanted to be that for other people.
Yeah. And with that being said, I was saying like you really changed the dynamic in the friend group, because I was in LA, of course. I was going through, I didn't start therapy till like last year, but I was already semi-emotionally intelligent, but because I was able to, I guess, break away from the fraternity, break away from you, break away so that I wasn't that annoying friend. Like I was chasing my dreams. So I had to learn to be independent and be in solitude, which also sucked, because now, you know, like being in LA can get very lonely when your life is in the Inland Empire. But I remember a specific phone call, and I think you might have already graduated from your program, or you were nearly, and I was with my coworker at the time, and we were on the phone, and then you said, like, I said bye, and you said, "Oh, see you later, bro. I love you." And then you clicked. And my friend was there, my coworker, and I was like, he didn't say no homo, like, and then I looked at my friend, and I'm like, oh, he's my guy, like, you know, kind of trying to, like, hey, we're not gay, like, that's just my friend and whatnot, and I think you normalized it, because now within our friend group, we do say more constantly, and as men, I love you.
Yeah,
I love you, because we actually do mean it, because we lacked it as kids, that we want our future kids to grow up around men who constantly say I love you. And you were the first person that I remember, because now I'll say it to Jimmy, I'll say it to Alex, I'll say it to other brothers, I say it to you, and it's because we actually mean it.
Yeah, and it also goes back to like our culture, you know, our society, like the way they were raised. Like we grow up so emotionally immature, without, you know, just being very stereotypical, ignorant, like not being inclusive, like us saying no homo after, like, it's just, you know, well,
that in itself, it's a whole, like,
that's a whole even different topic, different conversation, right? But just going back to like me saying I love you, because I do, and you know, I love like all my friends, all my family, like again, it goes back to like my own healing and me allowing myself to feel and be human. Like I always felt like there was this pressure on me, and I never allowed myself to fully express and understand my emotions, be able to acknowledge what was showing up for me, and let alone be able to talk about it. And so I started just getting myself in the habit. It felt very uncomfortable. It still does feel uncomfortable. I'm still healing. You know, I'm still going through like this process and this change and all of these like lifelong transformations. But the point is that like I'm willing to step into it.
Yeah. And and because you're willing to this day to step into it, I think it gives me, I could speak probably for Jaime, Alex, like the opportunity to also step into it. I know like Jaime's girlfriend also is a counselor, right? But so she encourages it, and a lot of us are now more open to therapy, not because it's a trend thing, but because we want to do it for ourselves, and because we see the benefits, and that our friends who are counselors or therapists, like, hey, you should go to therapy. So it's like now being encouraged that you even pushed your family into it.
Yeah, because it all goes back to like, I want to break patterns, you know, I want to break cycles. I want to destigmatize even mental health and being a man and being able to express your emotions and not make others believe that makes you less of a man. It just makes you human. Yeah. Right? Like, we don't even have to include gender into it. That's a whole nother topic we could even talk about. But yeah, it just goes back to like I want to create that change and rupture that.
Yeah.
Because we all deserve the space. You deserve the space. I deserve the space, and it's just I want to be able to provide the space so that others don't go through that through their world alone.
Yeah, and I think it's important that you, as a male Latino therapist, so if people want to like reach out and whatnot, we'll get into that. But as a male therapist, seeing that representation, when I started therapy, I wanted a male Latino therapist, and I was like looking for one because I wanted them to understand me culturally. I wanted them to understand me as a man, like the struggles that I was going through internally and whatnot. So when I found one, obviously you gravitate towards the last name, and then you realize like this is the most whitewashed Mexican or Latino, which, all right, cool, whatever, but it's not what I'm looking for. I want somebody who's got their raíces bien presentes. So obviously now my therapist, I do it all in Spanish. She speaks Spanish, and you told me about her, and she's great because I'm learning about myself a lot faster than I was with the male therapist. And this female therapist has the empathy, the cultural background, and is speaking to me in a language that I practice at work, but it's not the one that I practice all day, because a lot of people are like, oh, your Spanish is great. Yeah, but I practice it from 5 to 10 a.m. and maybe a little bit after, and maybe a little bit just with my parents. But the one that I use the most is English. Yeah. So I really, really appreciate that. What would you recommend to those people who are hesitant about therapy?
Ask yourself why. I would really encourage people to ask themselves why they're so hesitant, or do some more research too. Like, even if it feels uncomfortable for you to ask a friend or a family like what therapy is, just go on Google and do some research. And even through that, like, look into some books or look into some podcasts, or even this podcast, some of the episodes that you've been able to like talk more about therapy. Yeah. You can start there.
Yeah. And I definitely wanted this podcast to be, obviously it changes, and there's a lot of like self-doubt and whatnot, but I really loved this conversation that we're having because I feel like it defines what Echale is. It's the whole like echándole ganas a la vida, one episode at a time, through Latino experiences and stories, because a big part of, I consider myself like a very faithful person, not necessarily religious person, but I do feel the power of testimony and the power of communication, right? So like storytelling heals, which is what a lot of people did in the past through storytelling.
Yeah.
Is there any places that you recommend people look into if they want to start therapy?
There is, you can, for other Latino folks, LatinxTherapy.com, that you can go on there and just look for a therapist, age, your preference. You can go ahead and tailor it to what it is that you're looking for. There's also PsychologyToday.com, where you can go and do some more exploration if you have insurance, if you don't have insurance. And if you have insurance, you can also start there.
Yeah. And I'll make sure to put like those in the show notes, so that way you guys can go ahead and look at that. One thing for this season that I want to do is ask a question, or like a final question, but it's going to be a question from a previous guest, and then you get asked the next guest their question.
Okay.
So this is...
I like that. That's fun.
Yeah, it's different, right? What was the most exciting thing you've done this year?
This year? I'm sorry, I'm thinking.
No worries. Keep thinking. That means you need more exciting things in your life.
No, it just means I need time to process that question and see what comes to my mind.
The therapist answer.
I want to say going to the Bahamas with my girl.
Oh,
that
that's
was fun.
right.
Yeah, we had a good long week out there, so it was nice just being out there.
Did you swim with pigs?
We did. We swim with pigs and sharks. There's some mini sharks. I forgot the name of the breed or the kind of shark it was, but yeah, that was fun.
What's a question that you would like to ask our next guest?
Going into the new year, what's a habit that you are wanting to break?
Do you want to answer that?
Do I want to answer that?
Yeah.
I think right now is something very small and simple, would be drink more water.
Mm.
I think I really let myself kind of not go. I didn't let myself go, but I am not drinking enough water.
Yeah.
But no, aside from that, like I've always wanted to be that 4 a.m. person, and I've always talked about it. I've always like the idea of starting my day earlier and feeling more productive as I start my mornings. So I'm going to actually try to hold myself accountable to getting that done.
That's awesome.
Seeing how that goes.
I think
I would say that's a habit.
I think for me, I want to talk to my therapist about this because I feel like I need to have a better relationship with food and just snacking.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's like, in the spectrum of eating disorder. But I do a lot of snacking and I want to do less of it. We were literally at a party yesterday and they brought out the bag of chips and I was just like, yes, like just snacking, even though I'm like, I don't need them. Mm-hmm. And I remember one of our friends there, Adam, was like, he's like, I'm not really much of a snacker. And I was like, and you're not really much of a snacker either.
No.
And I wish I was more like that, you know, because I think the snacking is what really kills longevity in terms of your diet.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to hear that you are going to talk to your therapist about that.
Yeah. Well, I have some other things that I need to talk to her about first, but anything else you'd like to add?
You know, if any of you that are listening to this podcast episode, if you are like currently struggling or if you're wanting to reach out to anyone, you know, 988 is a good crisis hotline that you can text and or call. There's also, I don't really want to get into advertising, but, you know, there's BetterHelp. Like there's an app, right, where you can go on there and you can really try to seek out a therapist. It can be virtual. And again, just going back to like, I know that sometimes it can be very hard just talking about it. Mm-hmm. Start with listening to either a podcast, a book, follow any Instagram therapists. Like there's therapists that have their own accounts on Instagram that like promote some awareness. They teach you skills, things like that. You know, like start to explore. Yeah. And start there and it makes a difference.
Yeah. And hopefully I am not stepping out of line, but hopefully soon and putting it out there to the world, a private practice for yourself. So anybody else who would want to reach out, I think that is also a good.
It's in the works. So hopefully by the time this goes live, maybe there's some more information that I can give you. And if not, then, you know.
It's all God's timing.
Right.
Exactly. Well, man, thank you so much, hermano, for joining me on this episode of Echale Podcast. Please let us know what you thought of this episode. I think it would really help me, you know, fight that imposter syndrome because I really felt this episode. I liked it.
Yeah, did you?
I mean, how'd you feel?
It was all right.
Whatever.
Nah, I'm just kidding. No, before we go, though, I'm very thankful for you because we did start with thankfulness.
Oh, yeah.
I don't really know if we got into thankfulness.
I think this whole story was, you know, well, me thanking you for just opening that conversation to be more vulnerable as a man and being more vulnerable, like with my father. Like I finally said 2 years ago, because of you, I love you. And that was like so difficult. And it really started the journey internally because it was during the pandemic. It was before the pandemic, but when you said I love you, but during the pandemic where I really started to internalize like, yo, like what just happened and how can, if he's being more emotionally mature, how can I not mimic that, but find my own way? So thank you for that. Yeah.
Well, you're welcome, bro. And I'm thankful for your friendship, and I still love you.
Love you too, and love you all. Thank you guys for listening to Echale Podcast. Don't forget to share the podcast, subscribe, like, do whatever you want with it. It's yours.